This lesson is all about backwards planning by starting with dissecting academic learning standards. So whether you're planning for a full unit or a single lesson, this is where you would begin. Our objective for this lesson is to be able to dissect an academic standard through a step-by-step process and looking at an example. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about why we should backwards plan and break down standards, the backwards planning steps, what academic standards are, and how to dissect a standard. So why do we backwards plan? Well, backwards planning, it's important because it's what helps you create lessons that are actually aligned to academic standards to make sure that students are learning what they're meant to learn from looking at that standard. There are 3 core steps in backwards planning. It starts with identifying the end goal, which are the standards that you're going to teach. Then, to determine what students need to know and be able to do in order to meet that standard. And then to be able to develop assessments and learning activities that align with that standard. So what are academic learning standards and why should you dissect them? Well, academic standards are clear and measurable guidelines that define what students should know and be able to do at each grade level or within a specific subject area. They serve as benchmarks for educational expectations and help to ensure a consistent level of learning across schools and districts. Breaking down academic standards should be the first step in any backwards plan. You do this in order to identify the skills and the knowledge that students should master for any given standard. By having a deep knowledge of the standards you teach, you have a better opportunity for students to develop mastery. So how do you dissect a standard? Well, obviously, it starts with choosing a standard. And once you choose that standard, you want to start by identifying the verbs and the nouns and adjectives that are in that standard. The verbs are the skills. This is what students need to be able to do. The nouns and adjectives are the concepts. These are the things that students should know. You identify these in the standard so that you can start to know exactly what you need to teach in order for students to master the standard skills. Let's take a look at an example. Now, I'm using an SAT reading standard for this example, but the same steps would apply whether you're using Common Core standards or NGSS or any state standard or any other type of academic standard. So in this standard, our verb or skill is for students to cite. And our nouns or content knowledge for this standard are text evidence and claim or point. So when we think about what students need to be able to do when it comes to the standard, they need to be able to cite. Specifically, since this is SAT, they need to be able to select proper evidence. And to do that, they also need to be able to evaluate the text that's provided in order to choose the best support. When we think about what they need to know when it comes to the standard, well, they need to understand what a claim or a given point is, and they need to know what good evidence is. Next, you use these breakdowns to identify the key understandings students need to gain from the standard. Okay, so the baseline understandings are the things that you can pull directly and inferentially through the standard breakdown. They're what students need to know in order to learn the concepts or to be able to execute the skills. So these key understandings are just really like what are the most basic things that students need to be able to know or do in order to actually do the things that are in the standard. When looking at the IITE standard example, you can see how the skills and the concepts are reflected in the key understandings. The one implied skill here is to be able to determine the connection between evidence and claims. So these are all the baseline skills, the most basic skills that are attached to the standard. And these are often reflected in multiple choice questions. Once you can establish these skills, you can move your students to more application-based uses through writing projects and speaking assignments, right? But you can see the way that we took and matched the skills and the concepts to the actual key understandings. So what would you do next? Well, next I recommend that you create a doc where you keep each of your dissected standards. You should collaborate with colleagues if you can to create one doc that you can build over time, really a working doc, and it can be used by multiple people in their planning process. After you have a standard broken down, you can start planning for instruction. You can find this in another video. But after dissecting, you basically go through a process of looking at examples and then deciding on authentic ways that you can measure mastery of those skills and knowledge.